Good morning and welcome to Thursday Takeaway, and today we're looking at another encounter with Jesus. This time it's an individual who wasn't exactly popular. It's Zacchaeus. We find this an intriguing encounter as it sits very well with a lot of today's society and what's happening all around about us. Diversity and inclusion is in the news a lot about racial equality and ethnic equality. And I see a lot of this in this particular instance that we're reading and that we can see in Luke chapter 19 verses 1 to 10. Because what I see is it's an issue that affects every single one of us. And it's very hot within the political sphere at the moment as well. And it's becoming more and more topical each and every week. And it's also something that's becoming highly integrated into businesses as well. And that's this issue of diversity and inclusion. But there is another one as well that's just starting to raise its head within the business world, and that's called unconscious bias. An unconscious bias is basically it's how we prejudge people according to our perceptions and our expectations that we've built up over our lives about how they will respond to any conversation or anything that we have. A bit like the cliche of the dumb blonde or the mad scientist. But you know, this unconscious bias, this was still very much part of the society in which Jesus was living. And it was very much part of the way in which Zacchaeus was living his life, because Zacchaeus was a tax collector, a profession that wasn't at all popular then, and well, let's be honest, it's not particularly popular today either. But we read about this encounter between Jesus and Zacchaeus in Luke chapter 19. And Jesus actually acknowledges that there is a bias against tax collectors, because in Matthew 18:17, when he's talking there, we read that Jesus says that if they still refuse to listen, then tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. And this was when Jesus was talking about dealing with sin to his disciples. So we see that even here, Jesus acknowledges that the general consensus is that tax collectors are sinful people you don't want to mix with. When you read again in Luke chapter 18 and 11, Jesus' words about the Pharisee and the tax collector when they were praying. Again, the tax collector is put in a bad light as being someone who's evil, someone who's wrong, someone who's not worth worrying about, someone who's a lesser citizen in society. Someone who's regarded as being highly sinful and not worth bothering about. You know, was this justified for Zacchaeus? His name actually means pure or innocent. And that's a bit of an irony when you look at the profession he was in and the expectations and how society thought about that particular profession. But what we do read is that Zacchaeus wanted to see Jesus. He wanted to see Jesus. And that word see, it's not just a general viewing. It's actually very much like what we might do to get to know someone. If someone new starts in a workplace or a neighbour moves in, we'll start talking with them. We'll maybe invite them round for a coffee, or we'll maybe go out for a meal so that we can start to get to know this individual. And that's the same way in which Zacchaeus was wanting to see Jesus. He wanted to know more about him. He wanted to understand about him. He didn't just want to see a parade of a celebrity. And that's why when Jesus was coming to Jericho, he wanted to see this man. He wanted an opportunity to meet with him. He knew that there was something different about Jesus. And you know, when we look at this, we just see that he was perhaps puzzled by what Jesus was, who Jesus was. Jesus was perhaps an enigma to him, a curiosity. And maybe it was to do with his own unpopularity. He wanted to know more about why Jesus was so popular. And perhaps he maybe even wanted to see a healing or a miracle or something else. And he was maybe questioning why people didn't see him in that same light, why he was so very, very different, and why people couldn't see beyond the fact that he was just a chief tax collector. Who do we come across in our lives that we automatically assume we know what their response will be, we know what their reaction will be, we know what they're going to say, or we suppose we know what they're going to say? Who are those tax collectors in our lives? The people that we could talk to, but we choose not to because we just assume we know what the response is going to be. Well, you know, Zacchaeus' profession did not have a good reputation. On the whole, they just ripped people off. However, if we look at this encounter, there is something we can learn about it. The first thing is, Jesus specifically went to Jericho to meet with this man. We read about that in verse 5. Zacchaeus, when Jesus said he wanted to come to his house, he immediately opened up his house. He opened up himself and he let Jesus come in. We see that in verse 6. Zacchaeus knew the scriptures. Now, for someone who was a tax collector and potentially someone who was highly sinful, it's interesting that he knew the scriptures, because in verse 8 he made references to Exodus chapter 22 and verse 1, where we read about the fact that those people who are caught with stolen goods, they had to repay, particularly in respect to animals, 4 times the amount that had been stolen. And so we also read that in that same verse, that Zacchaeus' response to Jesus, his encounter with Jesus, was so completely different to the rich young ruler that's recorded in Matthew 19, Mark 10 and Luke 18. Zacchaeus showed all the actions of a true believer in his response to his encounter with Jesus. So who do we dismiss? Who do we think aren't going to have any interest in God, any interest in a conversation about Jesus? Who are the people that we just think they're just nothing on their, it's just not on their radar? Because they are the people that we have got an unconscious bias towards. They are the people that we are actually discounting, that we are not including, that we are not diversifying our interest in sharing the gospel to. They are the people who are missing out on the good news of Jesus, the people who still need to hear about the good news of Jesus, the people that need to have that encounter with Jesus for themselves, like each and every one of us have. And so this morning, I just want to challenge you that in this next week, just ask God to open our eyes, open our understanding, take away the blinkers that we've placed on our lives, so that we can see those other people that are around about us that we would normally not see, and that we can share a conversation with them about the living God, and that they too may have an encounter like Zacchaeus. God bless you, and God be with you.